President declared the Stonewall Inn the first national monument dedicated to LGBTQ rights. My point is this: when we stand together, we are strong, we are adaptable, and we are resilient. Of course, the Stonewall Alliance of Chico takes its name from that rich history, and although here in our relatively safe and progressive town in Chico, in relatively safe and progressive California, it can be difficult for some of us to remember all of that. I know that I benefit from cisgender privilege, and I benefit from straight privilege because people who don't know me well don't perceive my bisexuality. I have friends who are trans, or who are out gay, or non-binary, or queer, and while they do struggle to affirm and defend their identity, most aren't attacked and persecuted by authority figures daily. In my job and in my personal life, I've met many people who are coming out as their true selves for the first time in Chico, and they are, especially with older generations, often surprised at how open and welcoming the people here can be. That doesn't mean that this fight for equality and dignity is over. It doesn't mean that we should believe that everything is settled, that our community is safe, or that we should stop being vigilant. If you step outside of our state lines, or even our city limits, the world can look like a much starker place. While we will hopefully never again have to face being jailed just for being out, there is an unsettlingly small amount of protection against discrimination and hate crimes in much of America. Even here in our own hometown, the rhetoric of hate and privilege has already begun to permeate. When politicians, celebrities, and other social authority figures set an example of bigotry, racism, ableism, and misogyny, it has very real, very apparent manifestations all over our society. It's not a joke. It's not just being politically correct. The tones we use to talk about one another and the tones we hear others use to talk about us set the stage for verbal and physical violence every day. There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of fears and questions and shadows in the national situation right now. There are a lot of things that we can't control. The one thing we can control is our own actions. We can educate ourselves. We can volunteer and involve ourselves. We can extend ourselves as allies to those who need it. We can affect our immediate reality. We can impose kindness, peace, understanding, and consciousness in our own workplaces, our own classrooms, and our own homes. In everyday life, we can control how we react when we see someone being harassed, and whether we speak up when we hear ignorance and hate. We can set our own ethical boundaries, prepare ourselves to defend them, and decide what we will do when we see those lines crossed in our own lives. It is of utmost importance to remember that we cannot fight these fights alone, nor should we. We use words like homophobia and transphobia, and while it is true that some of the battles we face are against fear of gender, sex, and sexual minorities, the reality is that most discrimination, most harassment and assault that the LGBTQI+ people face is a direct result of misogyny. The same worldview that delegitimizes and victimizes women does so too to gay men, to lesbian women, to trans men and trans women, to bisexual people and asexual people and gender nonconforming people and two-spirit people and all other members of society who do not conform to the traditional ingrained archetype of a proud, privileged man who dominates women. We are all in this together. Now more than ever, we need to reach out to one another. If we lean on each other and offer help when we're asked, we can organize. We can create movement and change and make our voices heard. When one of us is affected by racism or bigotry or misogyny, we all are. Let us not put our fears and differences ahead of our love and unity. At Stonewall, we're trying to do better. I'd like to invite anyone here who identifies as LGBTQI+ or an ally to come to one of our community meetings.
Wondering why there's a masculine identified person speaking at a women's march. For those of you that don't know me, I lived my first 40 years of my life as female identified. I know firsthand the struggle that women face to be seen as equals in this society. Being involved in the livestock industry, which is very heavily male dominated, I have many times experienced being invisible only because of my identity as a woman. One time I literally stood waiting for a sales rep, who was male, to acknowledge me as a person with a question. All the while, men came and went with their questions answered. They finally acknowledged me only because no one else was there, and they looked at me like, "Oh, did you have a question?" after I'd been standing there 15 minutes. Of course, social expectations had taught me as a woman to stand there quietly and not make a fuss. The way I was perceived and treated all changed when I started growing facial hair and developing a deeper voice. In a short time it took for those changes to occur, society started recognizing me as male identified, and it was like I was magically granted visibility and perceived authority. I'm pretty lucky, really, aside from having to explain to doctors that what kind of cold medicine I can be prescribed doesn't really get affected by me taking testosterone, or the constant struggles with insurance and family dynamics. I have it really pretty good. Privilege can do that for you. Since society now sees me as a male, they are more willing to protect me, accept me, and include me because of my white maleness. My community is the trans community and gender non-conforming, a community which I like to refer to as one of the minorities of the minorities. Trans and gender non-conforming folks can be found in every subculture. Often due to our gender identity and expressions, we are denied inclusion and belonging in the greater communities that our intersecting identities would generally allow us to be part of. There is potential for simultaneous oppressions based on things such as ethnicity, race, class, religion, ability, citizenship, sexual orientation, or sex assigned at birth. A trans woman of color, for example, has the potential of being discriminated against as being a woman and or being of color and or of being trans in the white male society. But because of her gender identity, she may also face discrimination within her own ethnicity and possibly even from other women, places that cis-identified women of color generally can find support. Since I have this privilege of being read as a white, educated male, I'm handed a crapload of privileges only because of these perceptions. Others in my community aren't always so lucky. Many lose privilege when they start identifying as female or gender non-conforming because they don't fit into the socially accepted norms. And they are not always laws to protect us. Currently, 33 states in the United States do not have anti-hate crime laws that protect people based on their gender identity. We are fortunate that in California we have anti-hate crime laws that are designed to protect all California residents, and anti-discrimination laws that will provide resources for the LGBTQ+ community. That doesn't mean that discrimination doesn't still happen. We need to continue to provide protection for the people that these laws have been set up to protect, not only by defending current legislation, but also creating new, more inclusive legislation to help our rights as human beings. One of the many privileges given to me has been the acceptance when I walk into a room of strangers, being accepted as belonging there without being questioned. I am also more likely to get or keep a job, not only because society is more likely to read my appearance as my gender identity, but I was able to change my identification, legal identification, to match my gender identity and how I appear. 36 states require burdensome proof and or gender confirmation surgery or treatment in order for a person to get their gender marker changed to their legal IDs. This means they can't get passports changed, their social security gender markers don't match their paycheck, employers, they get outed. Additionally, some folks that identify in the gender non-conforming community don't even have legal verbiage for their identity available to them. Without anti-discrimination laws in so many states, trans and gender non-conforming individuals are not protected in jobs, resulting in not being hired or being fired just because of their gender identity. This plays a large role in why my trans community is over twice as likely to live in poverty as the average citizen. Acceptance of someone's gender identity, which is for them to decide and nobody else, would help reduce this awful statistic. This has the potential to decrease unemployment and hopefully improve the quality of life of so many trans community members that just so much want to be part of everyday society. A majority of my community are generally not accepted in this same society because of the narrow, unforgiving social standards of gender expectations held by so many. Often, because of our gender identities, many of us are turned away from the community who we were born into, whether it be our birth families, our familial cultures, our faith communities, our schools, our social organizations, and a myriad of other communities or subcultures where we could find belonging. However, the trans and gender non-conforming community is resilient. We have been around for centuries, and we find and create new communities that accept us for our authentic selves.